So I have this group of girls that I was friends with in high school, and miraculously, we're still friends. And we have this group on Facebook, and one of them posted this interesting article to it the other day, and I was so excited. This group of ladies had decided they were tired of their wedding dresses hanging in the back of their closets, tired of them sitting in boxes, tired of them not being used. And they said, you know what? Let's have a party. And so they got together this one day, and they had, they were watching a game or something, came with their husbands, and so they snuck their dresses in. They ran upstairs, and they got into their dresses. They got their hair done and their makeup and all this stuff. Some of them used duct tape to get back into their dresses. It's whatever it takes. And they crept down the stairs, and they surprised their husbands, who weren't quite as impressed as the ladies were. But it was this fun kind of moment. They said some of them hadn't been to each other's weddings. They'd gotten to know each other afterward. And so my friend says, one of these days, we're going to do this. And I'm so excited about being able to do it. I have to tell you, my wedding day was one of the best days of my life. And I know most people say that, but it was like perfection. And Josh will tell you all about it. I mean, I had schedule upon schedule, and we were within, 5 minutes off the entire day. It was perfect. But it was a ton of fun. And I would go back, and I would relive that day any day of the week. And I imagine for most of us, we have some moment in our life like that, something that was so wonderful, so incredible. We would love to go back and relive it. And I imagine as well that many of us have points in our lives where something changed and we long to go back to the way things were. We yearn for those days. And I think as we explore the scripture this morning, we have to acknowledge that part of the challenge that the Israelites were going through was letting go of some of the past as they were preparing for this transition to move into the promised land. So I want to give you a bit of background to make sure we're all on the same page here. The story that we're entering into, the book of Deuteronomy, is this whole message, this whole sermon that comes from Moses. Moses is the one who led the people out of Israel. They were there in Egypt. They were slaves. Remember the 10 plagues? Remember the let my people go? That's Moses. That's the people we're talking about. And so they go from Egypt. They cross through the parted waters, and they end up in the desert. Now the plan is to go on into the promised land in a rather short period of time. It's not a huge distance. And so what Moses does is he sends out some spies. He says, I want you to go into this land that's been promised to us, check it out, and come back and tell me what you find. And so the spies come back, and they say, it's good. This promised land is so good. It is filled with milk and honey and all kinds of wonderful things. But of the 12 spies that were sent, 10 of them start to spread fear. And they start to spread concern. And they say, the people in this land, they are strong. They are giants. They are going to demolish us. They're going to tear us apart. There is no way that we can defeat them. And so the fear amongst the people begins to mount. And they grow frustrated because it's hard. And they form up a Back to Egypt committee. I've heard this term a couple of times in the churches, right? We want to go back to the way things were. And the people say, we might as well go back to Egypt. At least we had food. At least we had a place to live. At least we knew what to expect. And they even get to the point where they want to find a new leader. And so God sees all of this and says, if that's the way they want it, I'll just send a plague and I'll destroy them all. And Moses goes before God. And Moses pleads on their behalf, as he does many times, and God relents. But God says there's one caveat. Those who lived in Egypt cannot go into the promised land. Those who have seen the miraculous powers of that rescue that I presented before them, and yet who still do not have faith that I can protect them and defend them against these giants, that promised land isn't for them. Eventually, Moses falls into his own pitfalls, and he becomes a part of that category as well. He cannot go into the promised land. And so 40 years later, there is one thing left before the people can move forward. One thing left that has to happen. Moses has to die. He's the only one left that hasn't passed. And so that's where we enter the story today. And there is this moment at the end of Deuteronomy. There is this moment, this quiet moment. And it says, the Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Moses was never again going to be their leader. Their time in the desert was done. Once they crossed over into the promised land, things were going to be different. They weren't going to be like they had been. Life was going to look different. And so as the people processed through this, as the people prepared for the transition, they had two different things that they had to do to get through this. And the first thing they needed to do was they needed to grieve. The general period of mourning when a person passed away was 7 days. But we read that the mourning for Moses was 30 days. It was something they extended for someone in high position. And what they would do, they would set aside all sorts of normal daily activities, including grooming and entertainment and study, and they would focus in on the person who'd been lost, on what they had lost, of the relationships that were lost. The grief hits hard for the Israelites. They had this beloved leader. Josephus even writes, nor did any grief so deeply affect the Hebrews as did this upon the death of Moses. Those who had walked with him through the desert, they understood his leadership, they knew the things he could offer, and they were scared of what life looked like without him. Those who hadn't had the opportunity to do that very long had heard the stories and knew what he was capable of, and they were sad that they missed the opportunity to walk alongside him. And so to put it lightly, everyone was devastated. And they took the full 30 days to grieve. And I think there's something that we have to learn from this, something to gain. It is okay to take time to grieve. It is okay to mourn the past. Sometimes we have to stop and take time. We have to allow ourselves space. We have to give ourselves permission to grieve before we can move forward. We mourn all sorts of things. We tend to talk about death and grief and mourning as in terms of a person, sometimes in terms of an animal. But sometimes we forget that we have to mourn and grieve our circumstances and our situations and our life changes as well. We grieve our past. We grieve where we came from and the seasons of life that we've lived. We grieve for those who are no longer with us, as well as our missed opportunities and our glorious successes. I think of the movie National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. And I'm sure many of you have seen it. And there's this point where Clark Griswold, the dad, he gets stuck in the attic. And he's sitting there kind of on top of the ladder, and he's cold, and he's found these old gloves and this turban, and he's sitting there, and he gets this old reel-to-reel projector out. And he starts to watch these films of his family and his kids as they're growing up, and he's wrestling really with the chaos and the messiness of his current reality. What's going on out here outside the attic is a lot to handle and a lot to manage, and he takes this moment, he has this memory lane that he kind of strolls down, and he has these sweet moments of the past. And you feel this almost brief tinge of of grief, this brief tinge of grief as the tears start to roll down his face, because there's this understanding, excuse me, things aren't like they used to be. Things aren't like they used to be. And it begs the question for us, when life change hits us full force, do we take the time necessary to grieve? If we want to live life with intentionality, we have to acknowledge something has changed. Something has happened. And we have to grieve that, because if we don't, we'll never really be able to let go of the past. Take time to grieve. Now, as we keep reading through the text, there becomes this moment, it's almost an and then. You feel kind of like the people have risen up, they've brushed off the dust and the sackcloth and the ashes that they've been living with over the past 30 days, and then a new leader arises. The new beginning is here. Joshua comes, he is well equipped to lead. He has spent all kinds of time with Moses. He has been with him in leadership, he's been with him in worship, he's been with him in all sorts of aspects. He's not some like shiny new leader that was just sent from on high to come and lead them. He has arisen from within their ranks. He knows the people. And so this new beginning is exciting. This is what they've been waiting for. 40 years in the making. But it doesn't mean it isn't hard. They are giving up what they have always known. What does it mean to live in the promised land? There's this milk and there's honey and there's prosperity and there's goodness. We don't understand it. It's an unknown and exciting future. But I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. As wonderful as the promised land sounds, as great as the future that we have laid out before us sounds, new beginnings and moving forward can be painful. Knowing things will never be like they have been is hard. Knowing that we can't actually repeat those moments, we can't go back and relive those moments, is challenging. And so when grief overwhelms our ability to move forward, when the tears from the aches of our heart blur our vision, how do we begin to take that next step? How do we move forward from that point? This is the second thing we have to do. We have to choose to be okay with our new beginning, with moving forward. You see, the past is good. The past is lovely, it's instructive, it helps us know how best to respond in the future. The desert is a fantastic teacher. But the past cannot have such a grip on us that we're unable to move forward. We can't love the desert so much that we're unwilling to go to the promised land, or be so afraid of the future that we can't pry our hands off the past. We have to learn to be okay with what's next, whatever it might be. Whether it's the next stage of parenting, or rebooting your marriage, or dealing with or caring for aging parents, the loss of a spouse, our health changes and our health challenges. Adjusting our geography or reconsidering our trajectory or deciding that we're going to start to stand up for some sort of social justice issue, whatever that might be, we have to be okay with what's next because it's going to come anyway. The Apostle Paul knew this. A well-known verse, Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 through 13, he says, and listen for his words, "Not that I'm referring to being in need, for I have learned to be content with whatever I have. I know what it is to have little, and I know what it is to have plenty. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being well-fed and of going hungry, of having plenty and of being in need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." When Callie was little, and I think even before McKenna was born, we decided that we were going to be really great Christian parents, and we're going to teach our kids all these different scriptures. And so she's sitting in the van this one day, and she did this often, I can't remember what she was trying to do, and she says, "I can't." And he said, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." We're trying to get this in her head. And it struck me one day that scripture is not trying to encourage Callie to become Superwoman. She's not going to lift trucks. She's not going to start flying. There isn't some kind of superpower that's going to come along with us. That's not the point of the scripture. The point is that we can survive anything because God strengthens us, because God walks with us, because we are not alone in this great big world, whether we're in the desert or whether we're in the promised land. Sometimes we just need a new frame of reference. We have to let the past live where the past belongs, and that's in the past. We can take it out of the box on occasion, sit there and enjoy it for a while, put that wedding dress on, look at those baby photos, reminisce about the one that we've lost, or look at these different life stages. We can do that, but then we have to remember it's not our present. It's not our current reality. It isn't the time and the space and the life stage that needs our attention now. Jim Elliot was a missionary to Ecuador several decades ago, and he became famous, unfortunately, for his death at the age of 28 at the hands of some of the tribes that he was working with due to a miscommunication. Actually, there's been a couple documentaries made about his life. But they found his journals after he died, and they looked through them and found several different things he said about his understanding of God. And one of the great quotes that came out of it was this: "Wherever you are, be all there." Wherever you are, be all there. A fantastic motto, great life quote, even better, a great rule to live by. Wherever you are, be all there. And I think as we evaluate and as we consider our own life stage, our own transition, our own new beginning, whatever it is that we're facing, we have to first allow ourselves to grieve our losses fully and unashamedly, and sometimes in the midst of community. We have to lean into the hard things. And there's gonna be hard things. We gotta lean into them, knowing that God is with us. And then we have to find contentment wherever we are. All we have is now. So let's be all in. And the hope is that as we find contentment, we will find peace. May it be so for all of us. Amen.